welcome to the first episode of the Risk Podcast. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with the well-regarded Nicole Schepanek. Nicole is currently a partner and managing director at Boston Consulting Group. Nicole is a frequent speaker at industry conferences, as well as a university lecturer and business mentor. We will be discussing a number of topics today. Nicole has kindly agreed to do a follow-up podcast, as well as answer any questions that the audience may have. So, Nicole, hi, how are you?
Good, thank you very much for being able to join that podcast. Amazing. Very interested to also hear a little bit about the question from the audience and get engaged in the community. Thank you.
So, Nicole, what is InsurTech?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because in theory, it's easy, right? InsurTech, insurance and tech. This is what people think. When you really think about it, the interesting bit about InsurTech vis-a-vis fintech is that insurance is a very broad area. And I think it becomes even broader and broader because everything is insurable. Well, yeah. And in the past, not everything has been insurable, but with the new technology, more and more risks, because we're also talking about risk management, become insurable. So therefore, I always differentiate between insurance relevant tech and InsurTech per se. Yeah, and within the InsurTech then per se, you probably kind of distinguish between the digital attackers that either kind of become an insurer themselves and are really kind of an attacker across the value chain, or kind of, bits and pieces to say they really focus on claims management, etc. Vis-a-vis the one that actually help, and we come to that later perhaps, that enable insurance incumbents to really improve their kind of piece of the value chain. So for example, there are a couple of folks who focus on underwriting, some focus on marine claims management. So there are different bits and pieces quite frequently in the B2B2C world.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And in terms of the digital distribution to an industry, it sometimes takes time to implement. What can insurers do to expedite a transition into a more tech-led solution?
Yeah, that's the big the big question. I think the answer is not so difficult. The implementation seems very difficult, at least if you see the speed. I think there are kind of three dimensions I would look into. Number one, to really focus on the customer first angle. And it sounds very easy, but it's not like the insurance industry has been regulated for such a long time across the world. And number one, and number two, everything is still going well, too well for the insurance industry as such in terms of profit margins. So there is insufficient pressure, and generally speaking, one has been very much focused on providing balance sheet capacity, providing kind of risk management capabilities, and not so great very much coming from what does the customer want. And the customer could be an end customer or could be like also a business. But kind of these demands are really, really changing. And I think these are also the real kind of the real enemy, so to speak. I would not so much think about like the InsurTechs, etc. as such, but to really think about what are the changing customer demands and what do I need to ensure to be kind of, be the preferred provider, not only now, but also 5 years from now. So I think there are three things. So the first thing is, as I said before, right now, the customer-centric thinking, to really think about the customer, not what do I have and want to offer, but what the customer wants and what can I offer. Number one. Number two, to really, really simplify the product. And simplification doesn't mean you have fewer products, right? But, to make them understandable, again, from that idea, coming from the customer, what does the customer needs, be very specific in that regard. And there we have this big topic for incumbents because they're all sitting on the legacy system. So I think that kind of, jumps then into the third one, third approach. I would, from an IT perspective, always go from a two-pronged approach. So the one is to say, what is the long-term strategy? And perhaps you want to change your legacy systems, etc., right? But then in the meantime, be nimble, think about where your USP is and should be, and therefore really invest at kind of, be more like a startup from that perspective. And perhaps one interesting to see is that there's sufficient, a lot of kind of the incumbents always struggle about their legacy systems. Yeah. So I think there are a couple of startups out there, for example, PolicyDoc, who really help, do an overlay, so kind of to marry both worlds. So in terms of simplification or kind of this two-pronged approach, it doesn't always need to be kind of, you need to change your entire kind of IT landscape and wait 5 years for that.
How can those businesses look at that as an example?
I think they perhaps, I'm not quite sure if, but let me give two answers to that, and then we see if there's something else to ask. So I think that the one is, let me give you the one example. One large insurance group is now kind of starting to work, for example, with PolicyDoc, and they are considering how to simplify their product landscape, and how to harmonize. So it's more probably harmonization rather than simplification, but harmonize their product landscape and simplify it in the way that their data sea becomes accessible, because that's the challenge. The insurer is sitting on so much kind of information and data, but the accessibility is the question. So they're working with PolicyDoc, who helps them link. It's kind of a big API plug, right? So to ensure that the data becomes accessible, number one, and number two, also kind of run proper analytics on it, that then improves underwriting, improves product design, etc. So that is one pragmatic, for example, first step you can take, rather than kind of do this very, very long-term, 3 to 5 years. Yeah. We are going to change the entire world. I think that's one element. Another element I mentioned, which I didn't mention in the three, but from a kind of, because the three were focused on the what, not so much on the how. Yep. So I think the how is really crucial. I think on the how, the challenge for insurers is how to set the right KPIs, how to build the right teams. And agile at scale is a little bit overused. I don't think it needs to be necessarily an agile at scale program, but generally kind of to incentivize entrepreneurship, risk-taking, calculated risk-taking. And I think that is something, but and that combined, this is also again from the risk management perspective, to kind of then also shut down the lights if we say that venture didn't pan out as we intended it to be. And that's the challenge I see quite frequently with incumbents on the second line. So they start a lot of small initiatives, but rather than after, like every VC would be doing, after a certain stage say, do you get further money or not? So go or not go? They continue. They continue to invest. So not much, but they continue to invest.
Would you say that there's also a piece around mindset? So having a certain mindset and actually bringing in the right people with that long-term strategic thinking that could, massively help these businesses.
I agree. I think mindset, culture change is a big one. And it provides also the idea. In my view, the whole kind of culture change, you also need to stick. And I think ultimately it needs to align with the right incentives. You need both. You need the kind of more change management approach to things to really train, and because it's like a muscle. So the challenge is, we all know what to do to stay fit and everything and stay healthy. But then, sometimes it's difficult.
You neglect.
To really continue to train the muscles. So I think that the whole change management dimension is an important one.
Yes.
And at the same time, align the long-term incentives, because ultimately, even if you continue to try to change your behavior, if the incentive is definitely on the other side of the road, then it's a challenge. And I think in that combination, there's also something to be thought about in terms of also salaries, etc. Right? If you look into, bankers still earn more and on average quite frequently than insurers. And I think the question is a little bit in terms of, if you incentivize risk taking, are there different approaches to link more kind of the risk return aspect to it, so that you're not kind of have to decide, is it like a corporate role job or is it a startup job, but that potentially you could marry both.
Well, I appreciate,
but that's long term.
That's long term, and I appreciate the analogy as well. That was great. So, what proactive steps can market leading insurers take now to ensure that they do not get left behind with these, tech-led insurers coming into the market?
Yeah, I think that's really always the question, right? So what do they do? Because they're really left behind the market. They don't feel it. So perhaps let me step back and then I'll answer your question. They don't feel necessarily that they are left behind. And that's the big challenge. So I don't think it's, as I said before, I think the InsurTechs definitely attack in certain niches, in certain markets, in certain niches. I don't see yet anyone who is kind of the, breaks, becomes the attacker of a Allianz, AXA, CHAP, etc. Right? Having said that, if you're attacked from a lot of kind of different sides, it's still an attack and might be still kind of very dangerous for yourself. I think the important bit is to really think about the customer, because that's coming back to that kind of whole idea. Because if they're changing, then it's withdrawal from the customer at some stage as soon as they're getting a different offering. Number one. And number two, and we see that lately as Amazon, Apple, etc., they're all kind of starting to push into the market. It's slowly but surely, and I think then it becomes a really dangerous mix. And I think if you all don't want to kind of fall to the good old BlackBerry experience or Nokia experience, I think insurance companies need to wake up now. So coming back to what kind of proactive steps, I think the first element, this is why it took me a little bit longer, is that realization, the danger and the time to act is now. It's not like, in 2-3 years, it's now. So I think that realization and really kind of sticking to it from the top and say, this is what we want to focus on. Also talking to investors along the lines and bring them along on that journey. Because that's not so easy as well. And you need to think about that right now. So number one. Number two, I think, is to really kind of start to work with the startups. Because, beyond, kind of there are sufficient startups out there who are interested in collaborations. Clearly it needs to be, you need to define as an insurer what you want to be doing, where you want to play, and where's your USP, how to win. But then I think about, there are also areas where you don't want to have the spike, Perhaps, you want the data accessibility, but you need to invent yourself the technology to exit this, Or in terms of customer understanding, if you find certain ways to understand the customer from kind of a cooperation with a tech startup or so, the better, right? Then there's still the question, who owns the data, but I think all of this can be resolved. So many of the startups are very keen to work with insurers until they start working with them, and then it becomes sometimes a very cumbersome process. So, and then I think thirdly is going back to what we discussed beforehand, to more diverse teams, to kind of more like a culture and mindset shift, to really incentivize, and then the incentives that kind of provide the structure for that kind of culture change. because innovation comes from the crowd, right? It doesn't come top down, and the same should happen kind of in incumbents. And some incumbents are doing it very well in certain markets, and they are looking in one little LOB. They're really kind of trying to understand the customers, and sometimes it's actually the smaller kind of no, not always, but sometimes it's even also the smaller ones or more local ones who really push ahead, even if they don't come across like this in terms of style also.
There's some great examples of businesses from your perspective in that insurance industry that are miles ahead, or that you feel are taking the necessary steps to become, a market leader, or to challenge these market leaders?
I think if I really look into the InsurTechs that are really kind of pushing ahead, I think the key criteria I see, number one, that it's kind of sufficiently innovative, is really coming from the customer and really answering problems, number one. Number two, they also, this is why I mentioned that previously, they ensure that they build a proper insurer, with the proper processes, so that it doesn't become only a hype, but kind of a real proper business.
Building a solution.
Exactly. And as a result, perhaps they don't seem to be immediately the most sexy, and then some incumbents say, well, they're kind of doing the same as we are doing, but they're still faster. And I think, for example, Oscar Health, I think they've done an excellent job from that perspective. They really went to very much niche into a market. It's not necessarily a model that you can nicely kind of put into other areas, because the healthcare system in the US is very specific. So I think that's a great one. One Insurance, still very small, but I think they're making very much headways in terms of really simplifying their product suite and really coming from the customer. And we discussed distribution before, and they really think not only of the end customer, but also of the broker. So really working with the brokers and, kind of identify how to help them sell. I think that, so there are a couple of ones in that area. And then I think there are a couple of ones who kind of help insurers, like DigiSure, for example. They are helping with partnerships, right? So like, the big companies, like IKEA, etc., they all want to go into insurance as well, or a lot of them think about how to provide their own insurance offering. So they really kind of help larger companies to get into insurance and the kind of financial service growth within their kind of traditional kind of business area. So I think that's also an interesting approach. And then, there are a couple of ones. I think there are so many great ones, and also far more great ones that, a lot of people haven't heard about beforehand in terms of that are more B2B, B2C, and are really, really tech focused. I mean, what I really always look for if I talk to founders is to have a real tech focus with a clear business angle, business proposition. But only business proposition and not knowing how to really kind of revive the tech, I think that's a little bit too risky position in 21.
Okay, fantastic. Nicole, you've built many successful teams at a lot of big businesses. So what have you learned from building teams, and how do you keep the teams engaged?
Yeah, that's the big question, especially right now. I think what I'm always looking for is for diverse teams, and diverse teams I'm also mean in mindset. And there's a correlation for all the risk people out there. There's clearly a correlation between kind of diverse mindsets and diverse backgrounds. Let's put it that way, or kind of experience in life. So I think that really helps, and also different type of personalities. It doesn't make it easier, but it does make it more effective in the long run. I think it is important then to understand where everyone is coming from and understand, how everyone works. So a close colleague of mine, he's more kind of the let's quickly discuss and then I work on by myself. And I do like to kind of potentially initially kind of discuss with someone else. So I'm more of an extrovert thinker, so to speak. So I think it is important to understand how everyone works, what's the work style, and how to ensure that this, kind of works for everyone. But then if you really have diverse teams, you get a better product, you get a better solution. So I think this diverse element is a crucial one. Secondly, to ensure that, especially then, but also otherwise, and especially now with COVID, to really have a discussion with the team and say, so what are your what are your goals for this week? Yeah, is it you want to do your yoga session? Is it you want to go for the run? You want to have time with the kids? And it really work that into the schedule, because I felt a lot of people became very much overtired from Zoom, because it's kind of, I at some stage tried to schedule some lunch in between, but then there were the odd in-between breaks where you're like, sorry, I'm quickly on mute and offline to just quickly grab something. As a leader, I think for me that works, although it became tiring. But I think, for the younger folks, and it is tiring, and I think we need to accept that in a lot of families as well, with the kids at home, etc. So I think it's important. It's generally important, but through COVID, even more important to really discuss what kind of type of worker are you? How much do we want to space kind of face to face versus this is you block three hours, in the afternoon to work by yourself. How can you ensure that and cater for all of these different dimensions? I think that's the second big dimension. And then I think the third one is, to have some fun together as well. So we have done some wine tasting, or juice tasting for some. For others, it was wine tasting with some meals. So I sent everyone around, and it really just discuss, and we really say, we talk about everything, just not work.
Good.
But I think that's important, and then really have a vision for the team. I think, because the real part is if everyone is getting excited and sees it's our success, rather than, they work for a leader and then they say, yeah, they get the handshake and the quick thank you afterwards. Because, and that's what I see with some incumbent, the great leaders at, the larger corporations. They spend the time afterwards to debrief the team, celebrate and also not celebrate whatever happened. And some others are kind of last minute, I need ABC. But then after the meeting with the group CEO, so they sometimes, I didn't have time to debrief you.
Sure.
These very little things, these are very, very little things, but I mean, they're important, they're crucial. And this, I think, they make it or break it if you're really team kind of culture versus more kind of a hierarchical corporate culture.
So have you made your team, at BCG, is it quite a flat structure approach? Do you try to adopt a flat structure so that there is more of a collaboration and less hierarchical, lines within that team?
Yeah, so I think, we have some kind of hierarchy, but that's just, in terms of also responsibilities, etc. But yeah, definitely. If you talk, to all my teammates, it's typically also, because given the fact that we really have this team approach, yeah. For example, the project leader or the principal or the partner that work with me or for me. they don't mind, because they know if really it's getting crunch time, then the question is, let's divide and conquer. So I do some dimensions, they do another, or I work directly with an associate and consultant. So I think that is something typically people kind of very much appreciate. But I think the important bit is to ensure that you signal you're not stepping in because something is not working. You're only kind of there to help. And I think that's the right balance to have, to ensure that everyone also feels very comfortable in their role.
Yeah. So you're actually allowing these people to learn from their mistakes, to take charge, empower them, and let them find a solution. And more of a approach. Okay, that's interesting. I like that a lot. And then
always go back quickly on the horse, right? This is what the horse riders always say.
Yes.
No, so sometimes there was like a meeting with a client that, it was a very difficult meeting. It had nothing to do with the individual. And it was really kind of, there were a couple of dimensions. Then we went back and said, what can we change another time? So what could I have done? What could have you done, etc. And then, we prepped the next meeting. I said, and then initially the individual was, no, Nicole, perhaps you go for it. It's no, I'm there for you. Yeah, I back you. I'm with you in the room. But you make it. And then, everyone, the client loved the project lead. So everything worked out very well. But I think that's also important because, not every meeting goes well.
No,
this is how it goes.
But you take the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And actually, I've the few businesses that I've actually been a part of, challenging but in a constructive way, and looking at the bad and improvement points, always helps. You can always learn, you can always get better.
Yeah, and I always ask for feedback myself, because I think the more senior they get, the less proper feedback you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess people sometimes may be a bit nervous to give feedback to a managing director and partner, maybe. So that's understandable. So Nicole, in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion, which you've mentioned, what else can we do to be bridging the gap?
I think diversity should be more than women. Yeah, I say that as a woman. Having said that, it's clearly also one dimension. And given the fact that I'm a woman, for example, we just initiated FLIT. So female leaders in insurance and tech. Some more to come with Nia Escobar from SCORE Reinsurance. So I'm very excited that we're launching that. And I think, I think such formats, and there are different formats for different areas. I think what is important to really kind of, just link, just kind of get to know other people. It sounds easy, but I think this is why we also launched it, because what I realized, it's not much that we're not promoted, but sometimes it's just good to know other senior women, who are kind of perhaps at the similar or kind of earlier or senior stage in the industry, and just exchange ideas. So we're not talking about women stuff, whatever that is. In the non-binary world, I don't even know how to define it, because I think it's a continuous spectrum anyway.
Exactly.
Talking to risk experts. But then, but we already did discuss insurance, we discussed tech, but just the fact that, someone knows me, right? And not only knows me, met me at one kind of evening, but kind of is continually in touch and knows I can pick up the phone and call Nicole and get some advice. Yeah. Especially since, I'm perhaps not in that organization, so I can be a little bit of a counselor and vice versa. So I think that's a good format. And I think, there are a lot of LGBT kind of type of groups, or kind of, we at BCG, we have a lot of groups in New York. We have the, kind of the Indian group, the Asian group. We have the Black Americans. We have a lot of different kind of groups. And I think it is important to just get to know each other, and not to see this kind of, and typically we all invite everyone else to join, so it's not exclusive for just that minority, but it's kind of, we always welcome everyone, and I think that whole just getting to know each other and support each other, it's definitely something that, at least from a women perspective, I must see could be strengthened a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, and moving, on from the diversity and inclusion part, the inclusion.
Sorry, perhaps if I may add, just one further thought. I do also think it would be crucial to speak up more often if there's unconscious bias or kind of conscious bias. Because I realize that, for example, a colleague of mine, kind of his name sounds Eastern European. If it sounded differently, I think immediately people would kind of have a different image and potentially a different standing.
Yes.
So I think and we find that everywhere, so I think thinking about that more, challenge that if someone makes a comment or kind of some intonation, I think it's important to speak up. And then thirdly, the more we can anonymize a little bit, at least on the kind of, at a certain level, it's difficult to anonymize, but, at a certain level in terms of recruiting, I think the better, because clearly there are a lot of unconscious bias, and especially the more foreign, whatever foreign means, your name sound, it's unfortunately proven, that it doesn't necessarily help the candidate.
Yes, and actually, that's a valid point. There are businesses that we work with that are taking this approach. Prime example, there's a consulting firm that will only accept CVs with, anonymized CVs, but not just the name. They actually go back in to see, what school you went to, where you're from, and get rid of all those minor points so that they do not know if you are a man, woman, your background, where you're from, any bias whatsoever, completely eradicated. And that approach, I'm noticing more and more clients are moving toward that, which is great.
Agreed, yeah.
I think another key point is the inclusion piece. So a lot of people talk about diversity, which is great. We need to obviously, bridge those gaps, but it's actually the inclusion part as well. So actually having the voice. So from your perspective, as well as calling out things in meetings and speaking up, is there anything that you could do at a senior level to make sure people feel more included within that conversation and have that voice?
Yes, I think what I'm trying myself is really and even do kind of almost a little bit quotas myself. So we are just founded the Swiss InsurTech Hub. So anyone is interested to join on that front, also reach out. And on that front, we had a long discussion, and we really said, well, we want diversity in the team. So we want certain ratio minimum, certain kind of, because you need not only a minimum of people, you also need the minimum of people so that people feel that they can have a voice. Because if there's one of, kind of man from a foreign country or a woman in that room, it's still difficult, right? It's still a challenge. But if you're already 2 or 3, and if you generally start to become a diverse group, then everyone, feels far more easily included. I think that's one important bit, and this is what we try to do there. So we looked on purpose, we looked at on the founder, that we have a good mix across different dimensions, background, origin, ethnicity, LGBT, binary, whatever. So we were, but we wanted to ensure that it's quite a diverse team. I mean, you always need to balance that a little bit with regard to, kind of how many people are already in the community. So some of that you can already establish at the senior level. And there I really push for it. And then I think on the because if the leadership is one-dimensional, it's very difficult to get diversity across the board, because then people don't know, how to speak up. So I think that's the important bit, number one. And then secondly, something else that what we are doing, perhaps it's related, I'm not quite sure how specific to yours as an answer to your question. So, for example, with the early bird, we founded, not we BCG, but myself. I helped with my own company, kind of Vision Lab. Yeah, Vision Lab is for kind of basically a startup fund, pro bono venture capital seed fund. Like an incubator, so to speak, and focus on people in Germany with a migrant background. So that's, for example, also a dimension, that hopefully promotes also more inclusion or more success, with certain minorities in the community.
Amazing, Nicole. And we've spoken about structuring and managing private equity deals into financial services. So can you tell the audience about this exciting venture that you're taking?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so my plan is to do a little bit more, less consulting. So the future we'll see. But I have my eye on a couple of kind of private equity deals. I think there are exciting opportunities in the mid-market. We all know the Apollos, Cinvents, KKRs, etc. will very much focus on financial services within Europe. And I think together with Finion Capital from Frankfurt, we really looked at providing B2B financial services focus with the digitalization strategy, and then work together with the management. So the idea is buyout on the one hand, yes. But on the other hand, you really work with the management to kind of scale and take the next S-curve. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity because, as I said, I think this mid-market here is not yet very much saturated, especially not in Europe, because the Americans currently very much stay in America. In terms of they don't see so much in Europe, much appetite to kind of invest, at least in financial services, at least as we see it. And I think there's a lot of, especially with the crisis right now, a lot of opportunities to really think about how to scale digitalization and how to combine both the dimension about kind of building winning teams, combining with the digitalization strategy, and then finally also ensure that the business is scalable and ready there to move to the next stage.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, Nicole, for taking time today to talk to us. I know the audience obviously get a load of value from you speaking. There will be a follow-up, as I said before. So audience, if you do have any questions, please drop us an email, LinkedIn message, and we will cover it hopefully on the next podcast, subject to Nicole obviously agreeing to do it.
Definitely. I'm very interested to hear any questions and exchange any views with anyone. So approach me or approach Jermaine. Thank you so much for today's chat.
My pleasure. We'll be back soon for another episode. So give us a like, follow Ingham Jones' page, follow Nicole, and take care, keep safe, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.